Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my channel Philosmos, where everything philosophical is discussed. Now this is actually the second video that I'm doing. The first one was actually 35 minutes and then I tried to save the video and somehow someway it got corrupted, so I had to shoot another one. This is the second attempt and hopefully I can remember every single thing that I mentioned in the first video, because that was like 35 minutes of like I just went hard in there, but yeah, unfortunately it got deleted. So this is a response actually to Nick. So Nick, shout out to you. Thank you very much for participating and being engaged in the conversation, because I really feel this is actually of paramount importance to engage in conversations like this, especially the kind of world that we're ushering in right now. But that's a whole nother subject for another time. So Nick had a question in one video that I did, which was titled "A Case for Free Will, Libertarian Free Will Type 2. So I will post that up there so that you can just click on that video so that you can get a broader understanding. But if you want an even deeper understanding about this video, please look up neuroexistentialism. I had a video on that. I'll place that on the link description, and so you can have a more in-depth understanding of where this conversation originated. But Nick had a question first. He had two questions. He had a question, and then he made a statement in the second video, which is titled "Is God Necessary?" That's the second video. But this video that I'm responding to his question, so his question was basically, is the ego not just merely observing events, internal events as well? Is it not just a mere observer? Is it a reason to say that the ego has any sense of control? Like it's just a mirage, it's just an illusion, and it practically cannot control anything, it just observes. So I think before we tackle this, I just want to make a comment on just how we've made so much strides, we've made so much progress in many fields in human endeavors like science, psychology, technology. Like we've understood reality and we've understood the intricate laws that govern our universe, but there's just one aspect in which we have not really made any kind of progression, and it's to do with the question of whether or not we have free will. Something so quintessential in philosophy has remained unanswered, or sufficiently answered, let's say. So it is something that will require a lot of conversations, but I think it's good if we all have a platform in which we can discuss that. So here's my platform, and here is my opportunity to discuss it. So firstly, the first approach that I would like to take is to first define what the ego is and what consciousness is, because I realize that this can be a battle of semantics. It can literally be a battle of which definition that you're operating on. So for me, the ego is nothing but a program that was instilled to you when you were an adolescent about who you are, your political views, your religious views, your personality. All that sums up into an ego, an identity that's attached to particular concepts, and conversely these concepts then inevitably affect your life and how you behave. So the ego itself fundamentally is an illusion, because it is just a thought, it's just a concept. Concepts, thoughts do not interact with reality in a way that's measurable. When we're given the conventional understanding of physics, of course, once we understand quantum physics, we can understand that thoughts are actual vibrations, and vibrations can be measured. And if vibrations can be measured, then we can actually measure to what extent thoughts could affect the physical world. But I don't think we have the apparatuses or technology to actually ascertain that kind of truth. But anyway, that's a definition that I'm working with in terms of the ego. And then I think I need to define consciousness, because in defining consciousness, I think it will give more of an understanding on what question you are posing. So, in terms of consciousness, I view consciousness as the underlying awareness in a specific moment. So the moment itself is encapsulated in this awareness. So the awareness is the moment, and the moment is part of awareness, and it's engulfed in this consciousness. So consciousness is the observer, is the overarching observer of all phenomena. Even attention itself, even conscious attention itself, is observed through consciousness. So I think you've utilized ego and consciousness. I think you use them a little bit interchangeably. So I think I would switch the role that you gave the ego and I'd add in consciousness. So consciousness is the one that observes, right? The ego is the one that appears to be engaged and participating in whatever event is going on. Consciousness merely observes. It has no preferences. It has no particular program. It cannot operate on a program. It can only observe. So the ego, as I said, is an illusion. However, illusions always collide with reality. Take, for example, our understanding of time. Even though we understand that time, although some people don't understand this, but for most people who do understand this concept, that time is an illusion. It's a concept. We are understanding, we're trying to make understanding of change by measuring the change, and then we're ascribing the measurements that we have attained through measuring the changes and calling that time, the passage of time. But that is an illusion. But nonetheless, we operate with this illusion, and this illusion actually has given us grounds in which we can not only perceive reality in a specific way, but construct the contents within our reality to such a degree that it echoes the existence of time, even if it is an illusion, if that makes sense. So illusions, even our understanding of the Gregorian calendar, so how we've summed it up in terms of understanding how many times the earth makes a rotation around the sun. These are all concepts. They're not speaking of reality, but nonetheless they do collide and they do interfere with reality. And the ego is the same. The ego interrupts with reality. The ego disturbs reality. Even if, so you termed it as just an observer. I view it as a thought, like it's an accumulation of thoughts, of course, a bundle of thoughts that fluctuate in and out of your consciousness. And these thoughts can obscure the magnitude of your consciousness. And if they're obscuring the magnitude of your consciousness, then that tends to affect how much information you can access. So now if the information that you can access is limited, then obviously the possibilities that are available will no longer be there. So new information is critical in a sentient being making new decisions or creating new possibilities. And I'm going to lead into what analogy you mentioned in your comment, Nick, which was actually a good analogy in terms of understanding the universe like being one big chain of causality, right? And it's just following one way, and there's nothing that's going to deter it from that path. I like to see it as like a movie film, like a movie film strip. You know, it has a set outcome even before you press play. The outcome is already set, you know, and that's how I understand determinism. And funny enough, a lot of people who subscribe to the belief of determinism like to cite Libet's experiment, in which People in the experiment were actually told to like lift up their thumb, and the readiness potential that was realized in the neurological pathways of the neuron that was about to fire to instruct you to actually move your hand, like the brain already went through that process even before you had any conscious attention of it, meaning conscious attention is delayed in terms of initiating action. So your actions are not your actions, but just nothing but a result of the natural laws of physics, and also the natural laws that govern like this universe. You're only following that, and if your brain secretes certain chemicals, your brain is going to be secreting those chemicals, and you're only going to feel that after. So a lot of people who ascribe to determinism like to cite that as clear evidence that free will cannot possibly exist in such a situation. But I would advocate that the mere movement of your thumb cannot be superimposed in other decisions that you make during the course of your life, and I did touch base on that in the other video, a case for free will. We cannot say that because we moved our thumb and our brain was already initiating a readiness response in terms of your neurological pathways, that somehow, some way, that means that with every situation in your life, the act of free will, the feel of free will, is nothing but an illusion. In truth, human decision is way more complex than that. There are many other things that we could factor in making a decision that don't only affect this present moment, but could affect that could affect you long term. Perhaps making a decision on what kind of person to marry, making the decision on what kind of career you'd like to choose. This requires some thought, and this requires a criteria that moves beyond this moment into a moment that's designated in the future, but nonetheless it's something that you can contemplate. And funny enough, libertarian free will type 2 alludes to this. So in libertarian free will, let me just start off by saying that I don't really ascribe to the belief of the philosophical thought of libertarian free will. I would say I'm leaning more towards compatibilism, but it's very hard to define these things sometimes, especially when the criteria is different in different approaches. But nonetheless, libertarian free will type 1, let me just explain that. This is given to most animals, like let's just say mammals specifically, or especially, in which, let's just use a tiger for example, when it's about to hunt and like pounce on a gazelle, right? It treads softly. It knows that in accordance to this moment right now, I need to tread silently so that my prey will not notice me. So the tiger is making a momentary decision based upon the present circumstances. That's libertarian free will type 1. And Peter Tay mentions this. This is actually one of his concepts that I actually picked up from. And then he alluded to libertarian free will type 2. Now, this libertarian free will is specifically designed for humans, in which not only do we have the capacity to choose situations or bodily movements or thought patterns that echo present circumstances. We can choose to be different choosers. We can choose to have a different criteria altogether. A tiger cannot choose to be a different tiger. It will simply follow its nature until due course, But a human being can decide to be a different chooser. You can decide to learn a new language, and by learning a new language, you have literally reconstructed your neurological pathways. And speaking about neurological pathways, Peter Tay actually speaks about this as well, in which he states that indeterminism is actually found within the structures of the brain, which is quite interesting because the normal conventional understanding of indeterminism is that it has no real there's no real evidence of indeterminism in the macro world. Maybe in the micro world, in the realm of quantum physics, there are many examples. There's a lot of proof that there's laws of indeterminism that operates in the quantum realm. So Peter Tay actually made like really great like experiments in terms of trying to understand this, because he realized, not only him but his whole team, that the quantum realm, right, the laws that govern it in terms of indeterminism are actually realized in the brain as well, that the brain doesn't reconstruct itself always in accordance to the past. You cannot measure the brain now and know exactly how it's going to change and rewire itself in the future. This goes in accordance to the information that the sentient being is exposed to, and then through that, then that will then give the opportunity for more information, and then by being exposed to more information, then the neurological pathways begin to alter themselves to fit that criteria for that information, so that whenever your neurons fire, they fire in such a way that echoes how your brain has been rewired. So with a human being, right, if we are the only sentient beings that, or the human mind or the human brain is the only organism that we can find where indeterminism is actually a factor, then if we even stretch it far out and look into the universe, even if the universe is ultimately deterministic, if there's evidence, even just a little evidence of indeterminism in the brain, then that then affects every single thing else. Then that means, because we possess the laws that govern, like indeterminism, like things that are not always caused by the past, right? Then we, being free agents in that, let me just say agents in this universe, we can then bring about things and usher in new concepts and new experiences and new possibilities that wouldn't therefore be there if the information was not exposed. So there's also soft determinism, because most people, like when they speak about determinism, they're speaking about hard determinism, that everything, every single thing, every choice, every action that you do is based upon something that happened before that. It's like a whole chain that you're just following, and yeah, there's nothing that you can do to escape that chain or to create new chains, as you alluded to. So there's soft determinism as well, and soft determinism is a very clever way to bring a new understanding of free will, because when I actually started thinking about this like from the metaphysical point of view, it's like a very interesting concept. So soft determinism is basically the idea. You actually mentioned it in your comment, but I don't think you termed it as soft determinism. But it's just the ability to act on your desires. So if you feel as if you're acting on your desires, then you are free. So even if like your brain has created like certain situations, sorry, I'm just covering my hair. Even if your brain has created certain situations, right, in which you are forced to like apples instead of oranges. For the fact that you are acting on that impulse of liking apples, you are free. So from that point of view, then you are always free. Every action that you take is nothing but a desire that you felt and then you acted on it. And funny enough, that got me thinking like even deeper, because now if we're uh, extensions of nature, if we are nothing but a continuum of nature, we're not separate from it, right? We are literal extensions of nature, meaning we are nature just expressed differently compared to plants or compared to other species, but we're still expressions of it. Thus, if we're expressions of it, then every single thing that we could potentially desire, you know, would be an act that we chose, you know. So every single thing that could happen to us, we have actually chosen. Why? Because if we're nothing but extensions of uh, the natural laws of physics, right? So whatever was set out for us to experience, whatever was set out in the movie, we chose that because we're extensions of nature. Why are we viewing ourselves as separate? That's only when the ego gets involved. But in reality, humanity is made up of the same substance as like every single living organism on this planet. We're extensions of nature. So it got me thinking about that idea, like, wow, what if, even Alan Watts mentioned it, like, um, you cannot study an organism without studying the environment, and you cannot study the environment without studying the organism. That the organism and the environment are actually one and the same thing. So whatever appears to happen to the organism was actually chosen by the organism, because the organism is nothing but the environment. So it's a pretty interesting concept. But nonetheless, I like your analogy that you used. So for me, I would extend it out and even say that. So you did say that when we come across other sentient beings, we create new chains of causal links. You know, like new chains of possibilities in which new things could happen. But for me, I will say that every single thing that could happen once we interact with other sentient beings and we create new chains of causal links, they are still predetermined, right? Maybe I just needed to say that so you can understand that it's still predetermined. It's still written in the fabric, right? Like every single way that your brain could potentially rewire itself is already there. Like that potential exists. It's just is the question is, will it be realized? So my video is actually starting to cut right now because of the space on my phone. So hold on. So I think the ability to gain the ability to view more possibilities is more information, right? And funny enough, Sam Harris actually spoke about that. He spoke about how we need to arrange our beliefs and the sets of information that we have so that we can make better choices, but yet he alluded that we don't have free will. So it's a very contradicting thing, because even Marcus Aurelius said it, like it is your fate to accept your own free will. It's something that is so intuitive. Free will is something that we cannot escape in terms of the sensation of feeling as if we're willing things to happen. But nonetheless, new information is critical in creating new chains of possibilities. That's why it's easier when we're interacting with other sentient beings, because they come in with new information, and then you coercively create new possibilities out of that. But Sam Harris actually had an argument against that, in which he stated that you are not free to understand anything. Like, understanding, it doesn't arise from your conscious will. That's just something that just happens, you know. You do not control necessarily whether you understand a certain thing. You are, he conned it like you're lucky, you know, that you have the kind of brain that you do. And if you were taught that 2 plus 2 is 5, then you would meet like endless challenges when you encounter other people, because like the information that you have, of course, is not accurate. So yeah, getting back to my point, he said that understanding itself is not something that is willed by you consciously. And to that, I would say that's true, because understanding is not something that I can literally create, you know, it's something that just happens. But on the other side of it, I can create the conditions to understand something. Even if I don't presently understand something, I can create the conditions that could amplify the probabilities of me understanding. So if I don't understand calculus, I can create, like, that's out of my conscious will. Like, I cannot sit in a calculus class and expect myself to just understand what they're teaching. It will be something that's out of my control. But I could create the conditions in which the probabilities of me understanding calculus would increase. Perhaps studying more, paying attention in the class more, spending more time trying to understand calculus, you know. So that's my view on that, and it's a very complex thing, and forgive me if I don't operate on a lot of the philosophical jargons, because it's like a lot of them to actually memorize and like actually utilize in a way that makes sense when talking about free will and determinism, you know, because it's such a complex matter. It's such a complex matter because there's ample amounts of evidence that proves that we're not free. But I feel the ultimate proof is if we had to construct a machine that could literally predict every single thing that you could do and will do. Yeah, I think once we've actually created such a machine that can actually do that, and it is actually accurate, because right now we're working on the assumptions that the natural laws of physics, right, are always they're always operating, yes, of course, but they're always at the center points on what actually transpires. We don't consider the fact that sentient beings like human beings could actually usher in new possibilities that, like, if you had to rewind time, and you had to rewind time to this moment where I could have decided not to do a video, you know, that decision could be made, because fundamentally, if the brain has space for indeterminism, then that then can lead to even a deterministic world having space for new possibilities that wouldn't be realized if it were just one big chain of causes that cannot be split into newer possibilities. So I don't know if that makes sense. So I am still stating that free will does exist, but in the context of exposure to new information, that then can help you navigate ways in which the neurological pathways in your brain could alter themselves to suit the conditions of that new information. But if we're operating on old information, then I could definitely guarantee that the conclusion or the outcome will be predictable. But the human brain, funny enough, doesn't follow that template. The human brain is continuously rewiring itself at every given moment, and it follows the laws that one would call indeterminism. So I think that would be one of the strongest arguments that I could think of that is a case for free will, especially as sentient beings. So I hope that answered your question. If you do have any other questions, please let me know. And then maybe I could do more videos about this and hopefully provide some kind of clarity. Because yeah, this is something that is challenging to discuss, because I really think it is a battle of semantics. And so I would say I'm leaning a bit more into compatibilism, because I do find validity in both free will and determinism. But I just define it differently. So just by ushering new possibilities and understanding that those new possibilities are still predetermined, but you get, when I say you, I mean the consciousness can select the possibility by attention, right? So but then I'm sure there would be an argument for that we don't necessarily control where we place our attention. Now that one, that we could debate through and through, but yeah, that's essentially what I'm saying, and I hope it made sense. So thank you very much, guys, for listening to this. Please like, please share, please subscribe to my channel. And to end it off, as I always end it off, for those who seek no more, for in the present we find it all. Thank you very much.